Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for the Chai Breaker with Jaya Modi and Rajyashri Goody. We're here for South Asian Heritage Month as part of British Council and Heritage Lottery Funds programming. My name's Parvinder Marwaha. You can barely see me because my kitchen is giving a lot of sunshine, but when I move, you'll hopefully be able to see me better. So yeah, I'll give you a little bit of a description of what the Chai Breaker is and how it came about. And it's going to be an interactive, informal session. I know you guys can't join on screen, which we would normally do on Zoom, etc. But if you've got any questions, then please post them, Facebook, YouTube. And I know Manny, who's helping us with the back end from South Asian Heritage Month, thank you so much, Manny, is going to reveal them to us. And Rajyashri and Jaya are going to help me pick them up if you've got any questions. So, Chai Breaker, how it started was last year during the lockdown and during the pandemic. A lot of my colleagues in South Asia were going into lockdown as well. So actually my role, I work at the British Council and I lead on our work in design and I look after our relationships between Europe and the UK and South Asia and the UK. So anyway, all my colleagues went into lockdown. And I was thinking one Sunday, I was like, you know what, the mood is quite low. We all love cooking and we talk about it in our conversations. And I was like, let's just go online and let's just make some dal. So a lot of us from India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, we just turned up one Sunday and we ended up making after 2 hours. And I'd never done like an online cooking session before. But it was quite inbuilt in my culture. I come from Sikh culture. I've been at the Gurdwara since I was younger. So every weekend we used to go and make food. And so anyway, that happened. And every Sunday for 4 months, actually, a group of us ended up turning up and making different things. And it was an incredible experience. It was really revealing for me because I am part of, you know, South Asian diaspora community, British Indian, and all my colleagues are from different places. And we would start talking about really difficult topics sometimes, but it was made so much easier because it was like using the lens of food. So, you know, things like topics like migration of ingredients, decolonisation, why we use certain ingredients in one place, why we even use certain language, different language to describe even an aubergine revealed a lot. And I ended up having this cookbook of like 2 columns, like one was UK, one was South Asia. And one day I'll reveal more of that. But one week I remember I was actually feeling really emotional and quite down. And I remember thinking, okay, we're not going to make food this week. We're going to make jar because it just felt very comforting for me. It felt like something we could do and we could just talk about things happening. So a lot was going on, like Black Lives Matter, a lot of protests and the farmers' protests in India. And we all just came together over a pot of jar. And after that, within British Council and other places, I got invited to do these sessions and just make jar and talk about, you know, why it even exists, because it itself has quite a kind of colonial history in a way. And again, that reveals a lot. But I'm also really interested in design, and so are Jaya and Rajyashri. And I think in this conversation, we're going to unpack things like why materials like clay and terracotta, glass, and other things can reveal inequalities, and why design can help, you know, look at these things. And also we're going to share some poetry, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, let's start the chai session. And Jaya and Rajyashri, please chip in and tell me if you do it differently, because this is just how I do it. And my mum even does it differently to this. So she's always telling me like, I don't put it in like that. So for those interacting and actually wanting to make chai with me, what I've got is a pot and a sieve. So I'll go through the utensils. And I've got a cup. The cup's going to be really important because what we do is whatever cup you make put of water, you put the equivalent of dud, milk. and that will make 2 cups of chai. And I've got a pestle and mortar to bash up all my ingredients. And I've got some milk, whole milk. You can use alternative milks. I've tried it. I've done about 20 of these chai sessions in meetings. I started basically using these chai sessions in my work just to start conversations, which was really fun. And then we've got some sugar, and I'm going to tell you a memory that I have about sugar later, which I know Jaya knows. And then the ingredients, I've got a couple of tea bags, so 1 for every cup I'm going to make. I've got some cinnamon sticks. I've got some ginger, optional. Some people really don't like it. Cloves. I've got some cardamom pods, which is my favorite. And I've also got some fennel. I'm not going to use it today, but some people do use it. And I probably should because I've got a bit of a cold. My family would say that you should put fennel in when you're not feeling so well. Okay, so I'm going to put the 1 cup water into a pan, high heat. And I'm going to let that start boiling and put some of my other ingredients in. So what I do is, in this pestle and mortar, I'm going to put about 7 or 8 cardamom pods. I'm going to put half a stick of cinnamon, but this might be a full stick for some people. And I'm going to put some ginger. I'm going to put my cloves in, 4 or 5 cloves. And they're my main things in there. And then I'm going to bash them all together and put them in the water. And so I put them in the water because through many discussions that I've had with friends and relatives, like we feel like water absorbs spices better than milk. So it's better to start off and put them in. What do you guys think? Do you do the same?
Rajyashri, do you do the same?
Yeah, do you do the same, Jaya?
I'm the worst chai maker on earth, and
No.
I keep forgetting how to make chai every time. Like I keep
I
feeling
love it. That's so
not,
opposite.
I'm not sure what goes in. And actually, I in 2015, when I was on like my first art residency in Taiwan, I did this little project which started with me making chai with a group of people. So I was interviewing young people in Taiwan who were the same age as me, and I thought to break the ice we could make chai together.
Yeah.
Except I didn't know how to make chai in the first place. So I was just getting like, people were like, oh, you have to buy this, you have to buy that, you have to buy cinnamon, you have to buy this. And also just the chai powder, I didn't know where to get it in Taiwan. So I was really winging it, and I kept putting milk, and only like after a lot of my participants had like drunk it, they didn't say anything, but then they were like, oh, like, quite a few of them were lactose intolerant.
Oh gosh.
So I don't know. I think I realized maybe I should just ask people questions like what they prefer.
Those are very polite participants, though.
I know. I felt quite
cute.
guilty. But it is definitely like I can see it because, well, tea in general, especially in Asia, is such a mixer. And also, if you have an activity going where you're making something with people you don't know, it automatically like opens up conversations.
Yeah,
sure. That's really interesting, Rajyashri, because that's exactly why I called it the chai breaker thing, because it was like an icebreaker, but like online. And honestly, during the pandemic, I was talking with so many, by the way, just to say that my water is boiling, just to go back to the tea, and I'm going to put my spices in, bashed up, and I'm going to put my tea bags in, and I'm going to let that boil for a few minutes.
Perfect.
Just to kind of infuse some of the spices. And then I will go in. This is a quick tea making as well right now. So I put more spices in so that it accelerates the flavor. So normally I wouldn't put like 8 cardamom pods for 2 cups of tea. I mean, cardamom is the 3rd most expensive spice in the world, by the way. So we cannot The first is tell me.
Saffron.
Yeah.
Saffron,
Second,
right?
what's second?
Vanilla?
Yes. Okay, so we have some experts here. But the
No,
third is cardamom. And so normally you could reuse the spices as well. I would say reuse them. That's what we do. You know, you have a pot of jar. But that's really interesting, Jay, because no, sorry, Yashu, because that's exactly why it's like you go somewhere and you're like, when I say, oh, let's make tea to people, let's make jar, they're like, okay, but you boil a kettle. And I'm like, no, this is a whole process that goes on in our houses.
Yeah.
And it's really funny that you're like, what do I put in? Because everyone makes it so differently. Jaya, do you make it at home?
I make tea when my parents are around. And so my dad really likes it with elaichi, which is cardamom, of course.
Yeah.
So that's how I grew up, sort of drinking it with a little bit of cardamom, to the point where we even carry cardamom powder with us when we go outside.
Oh, amazing.
Because everybody's been searching for like the right tea powder blend, but I think at now we're just at the point where we carry loose tea leaves and just do it proper.
That's so good. I mean, I use PG Tips tea bags. That's what I've been brought up with. They're literally like 2 tea bags in. And there's a joke in my family, honestly, that once I made normal, like a pot of jar, and I only put in 1 tea bag to 5 people because I was being so like stingy with my tea bags. And they were like, this tastes like milk. But just for people who are making it, I put the equivalent amount of milk in a cup, and I'm just going to put it into the boiling spices now. And this is that crucial moment. This is that quick jar, but I put it on a high heat. And the idea is that I'm going to wait till it boils, but not just boiling where you see the bubbles. There's a certain method that we do at home, which is literally how we make jar, which is you boil it until it goes to literally the top of this pot. And then if you've got an electric cooker, this is what I learned through one of the chai sessions because it went everywhere. You remove it from the heat. But if you've got a gas, you turn it down. And you do that, like in my family, we do it 4 or 5 times, up, down, rise and fall, because it mixes the spices together and it creams the milk. That's what they say. But this is an interesting one, because when I do the jar session, I always tell people, we call it like ublana. And in the English dictionary, if you convert it, it says it's to boil, but there's not really a word that says to boil to the top of the pan till it drops again, which for me revealed a lot about language, about how there are so many words not in the English language that look at the processes we use for food, but we would just understand them. And I asked Jaya actually what you call it.
You did. And I said that's what it is. It's like they just say like 2 ubals, like ubalna, which is literally what we do. But then when Parvinder and I were talking about what that actually means, because if you just translated that to English and told someone, they would literally just boil it and not wait for that fall. But it's that fall of that, that billowed sort of froth on top. That's when that falls. That's when you know. That's just like ingrained into you at this point after making a few cups of tea.
Yeah, Rajyashri, did you do the same?
I mean, I tried with my experiments. But I think I don't know, like I feel like we didn't really grow up with putting too many spices or too many, and it was much thicker. Like I come from a mixed family, so half my relatives are English and half of them are Indian, and I remember my English relatives having like a physical reaction to my mom's tea, just being like, oh my god, this is too much milk and too sweet. And and also I felt really bad because they had just come from England, like they had just come from a flight, and my mom was like, oh, do you want some tea? And my uncle was like, yes, I'd love some tea, but this was not the tea that he was expecting at all. But I think the tea that I grew up drinking was not necessarily any many spices, maybe just ginger and sugar and milk. But but just quite intense, definitely.
A lot of people think, and to be honest, okay, so I just did the first move of the ubbal, and honestly, when I was younger, my mum wouldn't let me go near this because she was like, no, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do it, because they knew, they were like, you're going to make the tea go over. So they just wouldn't allow us to. So it had so many things about age as well for us. Like, now you're allowed to make the jar. Now you can make it yourself. Now you'll understand what it means to make it. But they would always do this, and it's true. But I think I also always talk about the fact that it's kind of a misconception that jars like this thing that came from India and that everybody should know how to make it, because it's actually quite a new, almost kind of thing. It was used in propaganda in India. It was actually, the reason why I think jar is interesting is because the history of it came from like the British wanting to grow tea leaves in India and also in Assam, and then also to sell it to Indians. And then they obviously put, this is in a nutshell, and there's a lot you can read about this, right? And I know we look at the histories of it, but in a nutshell, it was adapted by India to be jar and add the milk and add the spices. Otherwise, what they were, what was sold to Indians was an English tea, So that's when I say that jar, chai, and also people call it chai tea, which I was telling Jaya the other day. I read this thing and it's so true. Like, why do people call it chai tea when jar means tea? Do you know what I mean? It's like saying tea.
Yeah.
So I think it reveals a lot of these things, reveal a lot of inequalities that we might not know. We just think, oh, it came from India. And Rajyashri, it's really interesting that you're saying, like, I don't necessarily make it that much, because, when I was doing the dal session on the first week, my colleagues from the UK were saying, why are you making dal with loads of South Asians? And a good friend of mine, Roshni, who works with me in Roshni, all of you know Roshni. She was like, no, I don't make dal, because they have cooks and people that help make it, or mum does. She was like, no, I don't know how to. So it's also like this colonial attitude. Like, I learned a lot thinking, no, not everyone knows how to make dal, or everyone makes tea. Not everyone's interested in making jar. It's actually a popular thing here,
Yeah, and I mean, I think in my family, like my mother especially doesn't make it anymore because she associates it with being unhealthy. Like like it's a bit of an addiction, once you need to have your afternoon chai, you need to have your morning chai, you need to have so she kind of feels like, no, I don't want to get sucked into that,
Right.
addicted to caffeine or addicted to tea or something like that. So I think particularly in our family, I remember when I was younger, used to drink it a lot, and then now it's just sort of like, no, let's not have this dose of like sugar and milk in the afternoon to wake us up. But also that's my parents being sort of very strict with their lifestyles and themselves.
That's so interesting as well, because it's true. Like, when I grew up, I was told jar's nothing without milk and sugar. And then now people ask me like alternative milks. And actually, this is the last part of the jar, if you've been making it along with me, because you mentioned, this is unplanned, but you mentioned sugar. So I do it at the end, where I put 1 teaspoon to 1 cup. So this is where, if anyone's cooking along with us, you would put 1 teaspoon or whatever you want, 1 sweetener equivalent, or some people like it really sugary, and then drain the jar into the mug, which I'm going to do separately. But just to say, in India, for example, when I go there, I say, don't put sugar in my jar when I go out somewhere, because I know it's going to be hyper sweet. But my dad always used to tell me, he was like, even when you say don't put sugar in, there's still some in the bowl. So it will still be sweet. And it's super true. Like, when I go, it's like there's still some sugar. So it's not like me saying, I'm not going to have sugar in my tea. It's just saying, like, I'm going to have a normal amount of sugar. So I can understand if I had jar like 4 times a day, it's like a dessert. But now my house smells very nice, by the way. which is amazing. I'm just going to decant this. So
Yeah.
if you want to say anything else about the jar, guys, then you are welcome. Otherwise, I'll be one.
I don't know if Rajyashri, you had that thing about relatives, not close relatives, but like the distant ones, sort of saying something about having too much tea and that to do with fairness and like the color of your skin and stuff.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I feel like I
Having more
heard
tea related to getting more fair?
no, like that makes you darker.
Hmm.
And I was
Wow.
just, yeah. I mean, they do say it for teeth, although I don't know. Again, I don't know how true that is.
I mean, the
But
sugar in general will mess things up, I guess, at
yeah,
some
I
point
mean,
in life.
sugar in general.
Yes.
But I know I've definitely heard, not to me personally, because I wasn't as much of a chai drinker. I did like sort of the whole system of it, like the making of it, and then everyone sort of sits and chats and things like that. So all of that was part of what I liked. But I do remember the really distant ones, maybe the ones not from Delhi as such, but like from different places, having slight snide comments about things like that. And I never quite understood them. But yeah, I was just wondering if that was universal.
Not to my knowledge,
But
but
good.
I
I'm
can
glad.
totally understand something like that
Yeah,
becoming a
a thing.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny that it actually, though, it brings the topic up of like, Rajyashri, you did a lot of work in like the reason why I invited you as well, because I loved all the work that you did around food and drink and looking at issues like casteism and like the inequalities in cookbooks, which again, it's just fascinating because we don't realize how design, food, all these things are so related to revealing inequalities if you look for them. But also, I guess it gives, if you look at it in the right way, it can, if you are designing or doing these things, you can also use that to make things more equal. So I guess it would be great to hear a bit about your projects, because it was specifically about like the Dalit community and casteism within things. And I know with this session you shared a picture as well of your project that the one with, it was it the cow dung or was it milk, you know, with the different colors of the cups. You showed the picture.
The one with the cups in the water, and then there was
Water.
Oh,
sedimentation.
yeah, that, I mean, that was specifically around water. And I mean, with caste and its relationship with purity and impurity, it really boils down to, are you sharing something with somebody else who belongs to another caste, and is that going to defile you in some way? And over the years, I've been very interested in food and also like water and liquid, and what how water supposedly like transmits this like disease of caste,
Yeah.
or makes things impure or pure. um, and I, for this sculpture, I had mixed panchagavya, which is a mix of cow dung and cow urine, milk,
Exactly.
ghee, and curd, uh, into glasses of water, um, to really speak about like panchagavya is supposed to be this ancient method of purifying, but also scientifically it can be fatal if consumed. And yet,
I wonder why.
and yeah, I mean, it's fertilizer. But this was prescribed in the Manusmriti, which is this ancient Hindu text of law, to, if a thief goes and steals something or something, like feed him panchagavya to purify his insides. But is that a cure, or are you actually punishing someone even more by making them eat cow dung or drink cow urine? Um, so it's just really looking at the violence of it and how far people can take that. how far they can make something that they consider holy into a punishment for somebody else, and
Yeah.
also discrimination. Yeah.
Yeah, I find the project really fascinating, and I know Jaya. No, Jaya, were you going to say something?
No, I was just absorbing that project. I think that, I mean, as a project, that sounds fantastic, and I'm just it's one of those things where I mean, I'm not religious, but it's one of those things where you're like, that's actually written down. That's something people actually believe in. That's
Yeah.
it's terrible.
I
So
mean,
I
it's more than like it's definitely written down, but it's interesting how, even though nobody, like not many people have read the book itself, its
yeah,
rules are sort of ingrained in people's minds through centuries. Like this book is
yeah,
thousands of years old, and
yeah,
I don't know anybody personally who's read it, but the same rules that it contains are still followed,
yeah,
either very consciously or subconsciously. um, and especially with things like drinking water, like we have this whole thing in India of not drinking, not like touching,
yeah,
our lips to somebody else's glass, or somebody else's bottle or whatever. And yes, of course, hygiene, which was,
Yeah.
what people would tell me, but I just wonder on a more sinister level, like, is this more than just hygiene, or
yeah.
is
Its
is
roots were
it,
definitely not in hygiene. Its roots were very
yeah,
much
like, or
discriminatory.
maybe the roots were in hygiene, then it changed, maybe this was like, nobody really knows. But
Right.
I would also see kids in school, like when we were kids, and if somebody touched them out to somebody else's bottle, like that child would get very angry and very flustered, like, oh my god, you did that.
Well,
And
now they can say it's because of the pandemic. They can be like, no, I might get
exactly.
COVID.
Yeah, and there's a lot
That's
of, like,
true.
with caste and the pandemic as well, like, I've,
Yeah.
like, upper caste friends of mine have, friends, have, like, very, like, easily, like, linked, like, oh, we were made to isolate from our family, oh, we felt like Dalits, so we felt like an untouchable, and it's like, that's
That
not. But these rules of, separation, people link that to caste, which definitely is, but it's much much deeper than that.
Yeah, and interestingly, again, we were talking about how, again, the materials reveal inequalities. Again, the design of things. Like when I went to India first, you see the Java kind of giving tea, and they're in these like terracotta cups or clay cups or the glass cups, and we were talking about how that also was revealing the inequality, which was reading the historical notes about the history and capitalism and how things happened, and casteism, literally what you're talking about. The idea was that I was thinking, wow, these beautiful little clay cups, they're one use, single use. And I was thinking from, the design perspective and environmental perspective, sustainability, being like, great, single use cups, they use them, they throw them, they recycle them, the next day they're here. And I was like, what a brilliant way of like recycling material instead of glass, plastic, really thinking about it from that lens. But then when I was reading the history of China, it really made me sad, because it was to do with this thing of like lips touching the cup once and having clay for lower castes, right? And then chucking the cup so that actually other people wouldn't use them, and that people from an upper class would be given glass cups. And I remember reading about some protests in India, even about the fact that glass was used for people, with more money or from upper class, and then why the clay. So again, we romanticize what terracotta, clay, these beautiful materials are, but in them there's this really, like, there's this history. And again, I was reading about, the propaganda. The biggest propaganda in marketing campaign in India was around jar, actually, wasn't it, at the time? And they even had this, again, it revealed further segregations between Hindus and Muslims, because they used different colors for the cups as well. So it was like, here's a marketing campaign for the exact same drink, right? The same ingredients, but they have to be from separate doors. So for me, I come from a Sikh background, And again, I just find, and it was, Sikhism is based on the equality of Hindus and Muslims, but again, within that as well, there's still a caste system today, which all these inequalities start showing through food, how we make things, but the materials. And I know you're looking at that as well, Jaya, right? Like,
yeah,
you're looking at vessels and how they.
Yeah. So my project touched upon clay, but I think it's one of those things where the more you read and the more you learn, and the more you're aware of further connotations of materials and the history that that material may have had. So I did this project. I don't think I can say recently anymore. It's been a few years. But I did it on the spoon because I was looking at how our food systems, well, due to environmental, socioeconomic, tons of reasons are driving our food systems to change, and what would be our food in the future, and how would our eating tools sort of adapt to that. And in that, I think, Rajyashri, you and I share this interest of water, although perhaps from different angles, understandably, where I just looked at the spoon being an indispensable sort of tool because it can never really be replaced because of its capability to hold water. A fork and a knife cannot hold water. And when I was doing that, I was exploring, it's a speculative angle where you're looking at the future functionality and form of the spoon. And while doing that, I used clay, one, because of convenience, and second, because of the more haptic sort of malleable allowance that gave me. And it was, and then with, it was easier to just deal with as a material. And I found it, because I was doing it from a design research perspective, and I was breaking things down again and then reusing them. And I also wanted to be kind of environmental about the whole thing, because I made like 55 spoons of different shapes and sizes, and the way one would interact it, how would you bring it to your lips, and how much would it touch? Would there be something that would prevent it? In interactions between that experience of bringing something to your lips. And that's where I really played with clay. But I think that's what, when I was talking to Parv about this session and about chai, and then, when you look it up, because Parv just a minute ago said something about romanticizing terracotta cups. And it hit me going like, because even over here, because there's the diaspora and everything. So there's a certain amount of distance I think we're easily able to put between ourselves. And I realized it's like, oh, these really cute little, terracotta chai cups. And then if you look at why, like, it's cute, sure, but then you look at why they've been used in the first place. And then there's this history, and actually not just history, it's very prevalent in India still. One can't pretend like it's not a problem. And I don't know, I feel like it really changes that cup of tea, and it should. And I'm glad it does, because that's what brings conversation and action. But yeah, I went on a bit of a tangent there. Sorry.
No, amazing, Jaya, because what I love about your work as well, and I know you're developing this practice in cooking, and you're really young, which is amazing, and what you're doing, and I know you study design as well. I think it's about looking at which is why I love using food to talk about these topics, and drink, from water, like we said, to design it, because there are everyday objects. So for me, knowing these histories, I look at a cup differently. And one of my projects is about these chai cups that I'm trying to develop, about the different materials we use to drink them, because we might feel differently in a day, and we might relate to a material differently, but also about these things that we're talking about, like how are we designing cookbooks? How do we design cups? How do we design, like, spoons, like you said, everyday utensils, where it reminds you of these topics of being like, wow, there's a real history behind that. And actually, Mani, I know you're in the back end, but Mani actually wrote a message in our thing saying, are there any books and links where people can get information on this topic? Because, I'd definitely be interested to read it. And yeah, there are loads, and I'm going to share some, and we all will, because part of this session, we're going to read some poems, actually, because again, every chai breaker that I do reveals something different. And when I first talked to Rajyashri, she was, looking at cookbooks and things, and she said, what, I've got some poems around this. And I said, I wrote a poem for the chai breaker, which people could read before they did the chai breaker, which I thought would be quite nice if we did it in person, things like that. And then Rajyashri, you shared some poems which I'd love you to share, but then what was super beautiful and really genuine, which is why this is part of a process. I mean, we're doing this discussion, but for me, it's about what happens before and after as well, and what we learn together. And Jaya actually wrote a poem in response to this, because we were talking about memories, and a lot of our relationship with jar, water, things like that is about memories with family. So we're going to reveal them, but just to answer Mani, one of the books that I think is interesting at the moment, which is really easily readable, is it's called Curry, A Tale of Cooks and Conquerors. And it has a chapter on jar, but there are others, I actually brought them a few with me. But the story of tea, it's a really interesting one. I actually got this in India. And I can write them down. I can update the resource list in the Eventbrite for people, because we've just given some resources, inspirations. This is not Indian, but Kakuzo Okakura wrote the Book of Tea, which again is really interesting in reading about tea across different regions. And I am going to read something from this book. It's actually called Masala Jar, which through my digging of loving poetry, and how, for me, poetry related to food as well has been an amazing guide through different things. And I'll read a few things from here as well, by a guy called Ilyas Qureshi. And for me also, this idea of jar brings in gender as well, because for me, I think, a lot of my experiences have been, people always say, why are the women in the kitchen making the jar and the guys somewhere else? But actually, for me, I don't see it like that anymore, because I find it quite empowering that we have this ritual that we do together as women, as well. And it depends how you see it. If you see it as I'm in the kitchen making the jar for people, or I'm the bearer of this nurturing, amazing, tea. But I wonder, Rajyashri, if you want to share some of your poems. That would be super nice to hear.
Sure, I can do that. I'm just going to read a few. I call them recipes. What I do is when I'm reading a Dalit autobiography or memoir or writing, I sort of highlight whenever the writer's talking about food or water or consuming something. Specifically because there aren't many Dalit cookbooks. There's only really one that I know of that actually exists. And there is writing around Dalit food, but there aren't really sort of commercial cookbooks. And also Indian food, Indian cookbooks with that title of Indian don't really sort of discuss or involve caste or sort of, it don't really make that clear. So I started creating these recipes myself, but adapted from autobiographies, because I thought, wait, maybe it's too difficult to talk about my community's food experiences just through a recipe. One, my ancestors were not allowed to read and write, so how could they even document something if you're not allowed to write it down? Two, like following a recipe employs one, literacy. Two, also like having equipment and having a kitchen, and then the third thing it assumes is also that you can maybe taste another culture, or so maybe you can sort of identify with another person. And with caste, it's like, oh, why do people want to identify with my community, with Dalit people? That's not really sort of so interesting, perhaps. So sort of thinking through all of these, I started compiling my own recipe books based on autobiographies. And I'll read one. I'll read a couple later. But this
Yeah,
one
go
is
for it.
yeah. It's from Daya Pawar's book Baluta, which is available. I can send a link downstairs. It's available. Not sorry, like upstairs, downstairs. But I've made this recipe called tea. Um, on Eid, your lover might put a glass bowl of sheer kurma, a delicacy made of vermicelli and milk, into your sister's hand and say, "This is for him." You might be halfway through a glass of tea. A viciousness might awaken you. Think about how her people avoid your home and see you as unclean. Stop your lover. Ask her if she really loves you. Ask her if she will drink this tea that has touched your lips. She might say she would drink poison if you gave it to her. Watch her swig the tea that has touched your mouth. Pleasure might tingle through your body all day. So, this is sort of tea. It's what I sort of make in that recipe because it's not always really about, following the recipe. It's about memories
Yeah.
attached to it and experiences attached to it. And just as we were talking about earlier, that experience of touching another person's glass with your lips can be such a powerful moment. It can be romantic, it can be daring, it can be a bit like sensual.
Intimate. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I just found that really beautiful, and I wanted to put it across as a recipe.
That's
Um,
really beautiful.
Thank you. I
Yes,
mean, another
absolutely.
one. Yeah. Should I share one more, or should I?
Yeah, yeah, I love it. This is going to be a poetry reading now, so
Thank
I love it.
you.
I honestly, I find it.
I love it. Well, this one is sort of similar, and I think it makes it sort of very clear. This is a book called "Strike a Blow to Change the World" by Eknath Awad. Again, I'll write that down in a bit. Um, I call it a moment of victory. When you are served tea in the same teacups used in his own home by his own people, this is a moment of victory. But the war is not yet won, the fight is not yet over. That's a moment of victory. Like, just to think about like how such small instances can make such a huge impact for your life, like not just personally, but for thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah.
Totally. I think you touch upon things that, again, I think we're looking at, like, design for dignity. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's our
Yeah.
dignity in terms of the fact that one moment said so much from where we've come. And yeah, super beautiful, honestly, because again, it touches upon the things that we said, like when you reveal it, just a small act of the being given that within casteism. I think that's a lot of the themes that you look at, but like we said, within the material of holding that cup, somebody else even touching it, how imagine somebody touching the same cup as you could be a comment on intimacy. Do you know what I mean? Like, so sweet. I love that memory.
Yeah.
So sweet. Jaya, please share your poem with us.
Mine's a bit long. Is that all right?
Of course, yeah. I don't think it's long. It's super cute, and I know. So just to give context, I guess.
Yeah.
Really, genuinely, me and Jaya were just talking about our memories to do with tea, with Jar, and she said this super beautiful one to me about her grandfather. And it was really fleeting because we were talking about design and things, but this was the most memorable thing for me because, like we said, we associate it with the memories of things and how we see things. So you can explain a bit about why you ended up writing the poem, Jaya.
Okay. So essentially, so I'm from Delhi originally, and my grandfather, he's a lawyer, and whenever he would sort of just finish up a meeting and travel back, my home would just be on the way to the airport. So he would just make these fleeting trips. They were not like long trips. They were just like, okay, so I'm going to come in, drop in for a cup of tea, and then I'm going to have to leave. So he'd kind of let my mom know in advance that he's coming. They'd be like, I'm 15, 20 minutes away. And so we were like kind of really ready for like a intense bonding session over like a cup of cha, and then he'd leave because he lived in Kolkata. So it's not like I'd see him every day anyway. And so growing up, I think for quite a few years, that was like an actual pattern. There was a thing that would happen. And that's how I got used to kind of meeting my grandfather over short bits of tea. It's not like we didn't meet otherwise, but those were like, I don't know, like a systematic meeting. And so he'd just come, there would be chai ready, he'd have his chai, and he was like, it's just the way he liked it. We'd have hot toast and orange marmalade with the rinds in it, and the thicker cut, the better. And that's all he needed. There was nothing more, nothing less, literally just that. And that repeated over time. Like it just became a memory that's so now akin to tea for me. So when I was sort of thinking about what to talk about, what to bring to this conversation, I sort of just ended up thinking about it and writing out a poem. And I guess that's what I'm going to read now. Okay, I'm going for it. Okay. August rolls in with a stubborn longing, an ache of absence felt between ticking seconds, beaded sweat, and the incessant clicking of the ceiling fan. It's been years since I felt the Delhi monsoons wash my face, fat drops glistening trails across smiling contours. The relief of downpour as the thunder speaks. I see green, but I smell soil, of salt, of ash, of smashed mulberries. I see grey, but I smell water, of sugar, of crushed roses, of tulsi leaves. In this rain, I miss tea time with my grandfather. Hot, milky tea frothing over ribbons pulled endlessly. The long slurp of the cha he pulled from the saucer, the satisfied ah he let out after. Cupped hands, fragrant brews, a faint lingering of cardamom. Steeped and strained, and I'm smitten. With chai, Nana likes hot buttered toast, then a dollop of rich marmalade. Orange rinds suspended in a golden luster, aureate as if one had trapped the sun. Majestic as its shiny syrup glacially spread, soaking and dripping down the edges. A spiced compote of overwhelming memories, slick with a heavy saccharin. Sticky, it clings to my fingers, pungent and citrus with just a hint of sadness. Like the dilesque innards of an overripe fruit, I feel left in longing, in wait, in memory. That's it.
Lovely. So nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's so nice. I think to distill it into the poem, again, like I love that the way we see it, just again, it's taking almost like creativity and being able to express something. Like through all the poems, we're talking about such other subjects, but using almost food and drink to make them relatable to people. But yeah, Jay, I love that memory. And I remember telling you about a memory which was actually really rebellious of when I was younger. So it's not a poem, but a story, which is that whenever relatives used to come, so my memories are really to do with always having pot of jar with loads of people. And my mum would call me and my sister, so I'm one of 4. And she would be like, you two need to come down and you need to put in sugar for everyone. Ask everyone, sit there and ask everyone if they want sugar. So there's a massive tray with loads of cups, this teapot. And me and my sister used to sit there thinking, oh my God, I can't even remember my Punjabi to ask, how to ask for sugar. But in the background, we were always also told that like, jar's nothing without milk and sugar. So I remember it was like a game for me in the end. I would go around and ask everyone. I was like, do you want sugar and stuff? And then if they said no, I would almost, you know, the 2 spoons you have, one to mix and one for the sugar. I would literally just put almost like a speck of sugar into every cup to almost show a little bit of like resistance, I think, then to being like, I'm being forced, you know, where are my brothers? Like, why aren't they being forced to do this? But now, honestly, I think about it differently, because now I really look for the moment and the memory of being able to even spend time with family to even do that. I see it as a really sweet memory of like sharing and being able to like nurture them and be like, do you want sugar in your tea? Like, such a different thing to when I was younger, being like, do you want sugar in your tea? Because you're going to get it anyway, you know? And so anyway, every single person would get sugar in their tea without them knowing. Even if it was literally like a small granule, it was like, it's going in. And yeah, that was one of my, I guess, memories. And I am going to read something from this book, because there's the poem Masala Cha that I wanted to share, but also there's why Elise called this book Masala Cha, which I thought I'd share, because that it's also really sweet and it kind of brings together things that we're talking about. So first the poem, and I'm sorry if I'm going to say it wrong. I'm not a poetry artist. I'd love to be, but okay, so it's called Masala Cha. I want to embrace you in the way that milk fuses with jar, bleeding into a single rich color. For you are the jaggery that sweetens the tongue. You are the masala that stirs trouble and flavor into my world. You are the malai that blankets me in gentle warmth, and the rust that soaks my love with eternal compassion. I yearn to be the kula that hugs and holds you together when you have no place else to flow. Yeah, and I'll just continue reading why Elise called it this, because I think it's really, really nice, and it's so simple, but it just says what this is. I still remember the day that I decided on the title Masala Cha. It was so wholesome. I was lounged in my apartment writing poems after just having made a hot cup of jar. I could hear my heart whispering for me to dive even deeper into my soul with my writing. It ached to explore the other half of me that I had always suppressed. And so I began writing what would unknowingly become the first poem for this book. With a cup of jar sitting on the table, I realized that Masala Cha was the perfect metaphor for not only a poem or even this book, but my life as a whole. I'm an entire recipe of rich experiences and memories that have led me to become the man that I am today. In that moment, I reminisce the times as a child when my mother would leave half a cup of jar on the stove for me before she left for work. Every morning in that empty house, I would microwave that cup and dunk cake rusk in it until finally it broke apart. That was my typical breakfast. I couldn't believe that I had forgotten that simplest memory when it was so innate. I have been making jar since the moment that my head could finally reach above the stove. After all, the only reason that I even learned how to make jar was because I would watch my mother make it countless times growing up while peering over the stove. And although a child that young probably shouldn't have been manning the stove alone, the recipe had been burned into my memory forever. Besides, logic is kind of thrown out of the window whenever you grow up in a Pakistani family. We have our own unique way of doing things. But like an epiphany, I finally understood why I was always so meticulous in the way that I made jar, because it has become such a cherished constant throughout my life that it has to be done right every single time that it's made. The first time that I'd ever made masala jar was with my father. It was when my mother had asked me to make her jar to soothe yet another throbbing headache. And so I turned to my father to show me what spices were fit for tea. I watched as he dropped cinnamon, cardamoms, and cloves into the pot. In excitement, I threw in ginger, turmeric, fennel, star anise, black pepper, and everything else. And while we were both so proud of the outcome, my mother made a very hesitant face when she took that first sip and the spices finally hit her. When I implored, she said, "Every now and then, masala cha is nice to have." From that moment, I learned that what is exotic to some may be common to others. Although I was inspired by all of the unique flavors of our Pakistani culture, these spices were just everyday flavors for her. I realized that not all people need flavors to remind them of home like I did, because they may taste them elsewhere, or rather, everyone just has different palettes of memories. I aspire to attain that level of home. And honestly, it's longer than this, and I would read all of it, but I know we're going to come to a close for this session. But I thought it was really beautiful, really simple, and it's kind of, as we've been talking about it, that there's something sometimes really familiar. And I think for me, I would encourage people, young people, and just everyone to dig deeper, that it's also really good to know the unfamiliar aspects of things, like that did we know that the cups could reveal something? Did we know, ask questions to your family about what their experience is, because underneath it, I do think it reveals so much. And that's why I love doing these sessions, because for me, again, I've learned more about how you guys see this. And I guess final words from Jaya and Rajyashri, anything you want to add?
This is really great. I've been admiring Rajyashri's practice from a distance for a while, and yeah, this was really great to actually have her read out bits of, especially the recipes. I think it's going to be something I really deep dive and look into as well. And thank you, Par, for calling me into this. It's always nice to put into words what certain things mean, because I know that we all appreciate conversation and chai and things like that. But when you put into words where it comes from, its history, what it means, and the active changes that are being put in place for it to become something better or bigger, I think that's when it really hits the sweet spot. So this is great. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Jaya, as well. I think that the design aspect of spaces and utensils and things we use every day are so taken for granted, but yet they can be the key to what is allowed, what is not allowed by different people. And this, especially, I think, with cups, with these spaces, whether you can use glass, whether you can use stainless steel, whether you have to break the terracotta pot after drinking it. All of these make such a sort of mark in your brain, and also just stay in your everyday experience. And I really just enjoyed this. I think part of coming together like this, and also coming together around chai and stuff, is also realizing why is this need to come together there? Why does it exist? Is it because we're missing something? But yeah, how dangerous even coming together can be for people.
Yeah, definitely. This feels like the most luxury jar I've ever had. Let me tell you. No, but it's really true. To even have these conversations, we are privileged, from where we sit. And to be able to bring art and creative practices like South Asian women is also, back in the day, it felt like that, privilege, and it shouldn't be. So I'm super happy to be amongst you guys, and let's definitely share resources, like the books that you were saying, Rajyashri, because I've got a stack here that I want to recommend to people as well, because for me it's really been a journey of years of collecting these. And I think, Rajyashri, you mentioned a really good point. There's also the fact that all these things happen through us watching just them make jar or oral histories in our culture over reading and writing. So it's also about how can we have more of these sessions to speak about it, to converse instead of staying in the literature. But I love how we read those out. But thank you so much, guys, and thank you South Asian Heritage Month, Heritage Lottery Fund, also the British Council, and we've got another talk next week around water, so I want everyone to feel invited to come to that, and hopefully we'll have more of these. You can email me as well. I know it's in the Eventbrite if you want to host a chai session or a chai breaker, but also I'll put more details in that. I guess we're coming to a close perfectly, an hour. Thank you so much, guys. Have an amazing day and make some cha, everyone. Okay, bye.